Check. Hey, episode 6, Flat Art Show. This is a conversation between me, Evan Dom, and Mattie Lubchansky. That is spelled Mattielubchansky. If you go to theirname.com, that's a sort of overview of their work. The books of theirs that are under discussion are Boys Weekend, that came out sometime recently, and Simplicity, which is coming out in 2025. This conversation was middle November 2024. Okay, see you.
Help me, I'm in trouble. I want to change. I want to get out of those old ways. I want to be someone new. And this guy's first reaction was to say, well, who am I? I can't help you. But the very fact that he had come expecting to be helped was enough so that he could be helped. He was ready for something, to change.
And I was like, I think I'm actually gonna watch this because I like Lady Gaga. I think she's a compelling screen presence, despite her being only in movies that I hate. I really didn't. Did you see the Bradley Cooper Star is Born?
I watched some of that in a hotel years ago.
Yeah, tremendously bad movie.
It felt forced.
I mean, the thing about, they keep remaking, this is the fourth Star is Born. I kind of think they're all bad.
The fourth? Oh my god.
I think, because there's the famous Judy Garland one. There's the Babs Chris Christopherson one.
Mm.
Maybe this is only the third time they've done it. Maybe there's a fourth. I don't know. I feel like there's an earlier fourth. I might be crazy.
That's still a lot for one. The thing that hit me about Joker. Okay, I was saying that this relates to something I wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah.
I was saying that I had absorbed all that discourse about it speaking to some silent angry majority, or it being politically thoughtful or relevant in some sort of way.
Right.
And then I watch it and it's just kind of like stupid, weightless trash, effectively.
I mean, it's real remember that, but do you remember two Martin Scorsese movies that are better?
Yes, exactly. I didn't watch King of Comedy until after, which is hilarious.
It's the same movie, almost identical.
It does the same thing. So Civil War, the 2024 Civil War movie, does the same thing where they're sort of trading in the iconography and the language of big political things, but it's made by dumbass centrist movie maker type people.
Yeah.
So there's nothing there,
Yeah. I actually, you wrote in the notes for the show A24 Civil War, and I was like, I want to talk about this because I think I kind of like it.
I really do like it.
Because I think it does all this motioning at important political stuff, but the actual movie that's in there that is good is about what do we actually get? What is the function of observing horror and strife? As we only can do that now, it's all we get to do, right? It's that one stupid meme of the trolley problem where it's just you can only watch, right?
And even to make it about photojournalists in the shit.
Yeah.
Is even more pronouncedly about that because they're right there where they could be doing something, but all they can do is look at it.
And everyone's kind of being and let them through, please. That shit was insane to me. It was that can't be fake because it's so crazy that everyone's shooting at each other. It's we time out for the guy with the camera to walk to get the better light or whatever.
God.
And and the soldiers are always pulling them out of the way. And it's that movie, if it had its big mistake was it explained it too much. the war, and like it barely explains it, but it explains it at all, which is a mistake to me. If it had just been like we have no like they didn't even say what the names of the armies are, like don't show me flags, or if they do, make them completely oblique or strange because it's not about.
But not too strange because it can't be about the strangeness either.
No, it cannot. It has to be like this is a plausible thing that could happen.
Yeah.
But like the story about like what does war journalism do, but like a larger point about like what is like disseminating these stories do is interesting. Unfortunately, I think Alex Garland might be a dipshit.
Yeah.
But like it really I really have you seen his the adaptation of Annihilation? Mm-hmm. A book I really like. I love that movie a lot.
I like it. I've not read it.
And now I'm like, do I like it less? because he does seem to just keep making like. Because I also watched his other movie recently, Men.
I have not seen that.
And Men and Annihilation and Ex Machina, all three of those movies are like, are women people? And I'm like, yeah, man, yes. I don't know, Al. But yeah, a lot of his movies are really they are all empty brained in a way, and they all motion at being smart, which is an issue I think as they go forward.
It's such a to make something about an American Civil War and to even at all motion, as you're saying, to even at all motion towards like there's political things happening, there's something meaningful politically happening, when that is so categorically not what the people making the film are interested in, or not what the story's about or anything, is the mistake.
Yeah.
And like I don't know, it's an interesting like case study to me in this I guess these like this dichotomy or these two parallel tracks of like building a fictional setting with an awareness of story and reader experience, and then building something plausible and systematic or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't think that people thread that needle very carefully a lot of the time. I feel like in like mainstream pop culture, it's even more fucked up. It's kind of goofy, I think, that anybody expects a movie like that, anybody with like considered or radical politics expects a movie like that to say anything fucking interesting. I mean,
it's like who do you think who do you think is making these movies? Like there are very few celebrities that are like homies, and almost all of them are actors, right? Like there's Boots Riley maybe, right? Is someone who makes work that is like actually a radical and like puts it in the work, and like but he puts his work out, and like I actually really liked his Amazon show, like
oh my God,
which is like a didactic fucking journey that tells you just like about like the crisis of capitalism. And I really like Sorry to Bother You, and I'm excited for his next movie. But like, there's very few people working in like Hollywood that do that kind of stuff. And Riley's always, I feel like he's always getting derided by critics for being like too didactic. Mm-hmm. Which like, I don't know, man. There's not really a subtle way to talk about politics anymore. I don't think there ever was.
There are certainly subtler and smarter ways to talk about it within media that don't require the cooperation of enormous sums of money and people and shit. Like, that's just not what that's what comics can do.
Yeah,
I think,
and it's also, I mean, that's what's nice about comics, right? Like, you and I could put a tank in the book and no one has to talk to the DOD. You know? Like, for real.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to put a tank in a book because I don't want to draw a fucking tank. But, like, I'm not big vehicles girly, but like I just but like like literally every time you see a movie that there is like a US Army base in it, the DoD has reviewed the script, which is like, it sounds like crazy talk, and it is maybe trite to point out at this point because I think most people know this, but like it is a thing to think about every time you see it. It's like every time you watch an Avengers movie, you're like, well, the Pentagon has approved this, right. You know?
As if everything else about it wasn't ideology enough.
Of course, yeah.
So, what's your like history with utopia, dystopia ideas? Why is that such an interesting thing to you?
Yeah, so I think, I was just always science fiction was always like the thing I was drawn to. It's always been like the genre I like the most of anything. And there's a lot of utopia and dystopia talk in most science fiction, for whatever it's worth. I think it's an interesting way to tell a story. I mean, I'm really drawn to the work of Ursula Le Guin. A thing I think about a lot. I mean, it was like I always bring this up when I was talking about Boys Weekend, but it's a thing I think about a lot, just generally with all the other work I've done, which is her book, The Dispossessed, which is like one of my favorite books. Have you read it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's a really important book to me, and it's about like.
Keep talking. I'm sorry, I'm walking around.
It's fine. It's
I have to show you something.
Yeah. But like, you know, it's this book that's sort of about you can see you could so easily be like, and this is a utopia, or look at it and be like, this is a dystopia.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like the question of the book is, what problems do you want to have, right? Because there's no solution to all things for all time that makes any sense to anybody.
Yeah.
Like, you're always going to be like, oh, either I live under capitalism and I'm like, I wake up every morning and there's a boot on my chest for my entire life, or I'm really annoyed because I have to share my room with whatever motherfucker wanders into the hallway and says like, well, there's no such thing as property. And it's like, those are two different problems, obviously. Like, I'd love to have a room, personally. But like, you know, I think it's just, so I'm really drawn to her work and the way that she deals with like the concepts of like utopia, dystopia, like scare quotes.
Yeah.
And then I think in general what happened, I mean, during, when I was mostly doing political cartoons for a big chunk of my career there, I really came of like age as a political cartoonist in like the Trump administration, the first one. And at some point,
the first
one, because now we're in the second one. Now we're sort of, what's cool about him winning non-consecutive terms is now we're sort of like it is no longer he is the president for 4 or 8 years. We now have like a sort of 12-year, the long Trump years now, which is fucking awesome. And I love that it's been taking more than a decade of my life.
Oh man.
Yeah. You know, but like, during that time, like in like 2016, it became really hard to sort of like, I was never interested in like just being like, hey, did you see what Ted Cruz said this week? And I've drawn him saying it. You know, I find that work really boring. I don't read political cartoons. I never really did.
That was never the sort of thing you were doing with that format, right?
Yeah. So like it's never what I did. So what happened was, and this was like at first kind of accidental, but then it became more of a considered thing that me and Matt Bors would do, which was like, what is the only way to sort of like do parody right now is like construct an entire second world. And we developed this sort of like wasteland setting that like,
I have heard, or maybe I've talked to Matt in particular about this, that he also has an interest in like developing that into more of a like straight-faced fictional
he's like
thing.
working on a thing now.
That's funny. That's a real
where he developed,
both came out of that with.
Like he developed like these couple of characters that were like sort of traversing the wasteland in his version of it, and mine would be like, oh, the institutions that like got us here are still extant, and like the people would like go to the the burned out Senate building, like commune with the skeletons, because it was just sort of like, to me, I was just so much more interested in talking about structural stuff, like, and that's maybe me as like I always hate to be like I'm a radical or whatever, but like I have significantly more radical politics than your average reader of the political cartoon website I worked for, judging from my email inbox. But like, it was a way that you could talk about these ideas that were like hold people's hands and be like, by the way, there is a superstructure, and if you can glimpse it yourself. Like take a step back, you can like see this structure if you just would look at it, and it's everywhere. I
mean, that's the thing. I mean, it feels particularly in stark relief in moments where the entire world is talking about American electoral politics, like lately, where like the divide is between any interest or capacity to look at things systematically, to see like big institutional shit, as opposed to just like the weird little Democratic Party detail-oriented shit,
Yeah, they want to
right?
like fiddle the knobs of the they're like it's like not even like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's like turning the heating up. Like what's that gonna do?
Twiddling the knobs on the most ideology-less presidential campaign of my lifetime.
Yeah, which is saying something. Yeah. It's I didn't even have someone like running from the left so that they could shank publicly. Mm-hmm. It was just like straight up like
at least do them the honor of shanking
like,
them publicly.
Even then it's like because even Bernie Sanders when he was running would at least make the other nominees like say something, resembling resembling sort of like we understand that things aren't perfect and they could be improved. Your life could be better. And now they're just like, no, actually, like our lives could be improved if we were to fiddle the knob a little bit. And I'm uninterested in the knobs. Yeah, I think.
Good end of thought. Have you heard of this book?
I have. It's like one of the only ones I've not read.
You should just flip through it. It's sort of it's just the format of it is really interesting and self-explanatory. And this is I ordered this old edition that has a cassette tape of like songs that she made with some friend of hers.
That's cool.
That are like in the language of this civilization within the book.
Oh man,
it's so fucking good.
This is cool. I was also like, she almost never does something this long.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really segmented. I mean, there's sort of one through line story that keeps being picked up and dropped throughout. Yeah. But a lot of it is just kind of like a pile, like an encyclopedia sort of thing of a bunch of different documents.
Yeah, I can see why you would go insane for this.
It's cool.
No, this is very cool. It's just some you shit.
Yeah.
I love this. This is very neat.
What's
it called again? It's called
Always Coming
Home. Yeah, this is...
It in a way that kind of follows from some of the ideas. Yeah. To me, it follows through from some of the ideas of Dispossessed.
Oh, cool. So, did she draw these or no? Do you know? I know she drew.
But I don't think she drew those.
Yeah.
Maybe like some of them.
Yeah. Oh no.
It's a cool book.
I know she always drew the maps, which I thought was cool.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, she's obviously an enormous like signal person to me.
Yeah.
To me too. Just not specifically about political utopia or whatever, but just any ideological conviction in genre fiction is so fucking rare and beautiful, and I am. Yeah. That's all. I'm doing things that are less overtly like argumentatively political than you probably. Yeah. But it's very important to me, I guess. That angle.
And I'm trying to sort of like, as I do more books, trying to sort of like tamp that down to a more sub rosa level, where it's sort of like, I don't want people to just read the books as like I'm making a political argument, because that gets boring, I think.
That's tricky, yeah.
It's tricky, but like I have my convictions and the work I make. I'm always trying to talk at least about one or two things that I want to talk about in there. Mm-hmm. Hell yeah. Oh, the big family tree. But I'm always trying to like, I'm just as I go forward in my work, I'm trying to, there's this thing when you're writing a new piece of fiction, right? Where you're like, I want to talk about X, Y, and Z thing when you first are thinking about it. And then by the time you set pen to paper or start drawing, you're so far from I want to do this thing that like you're now worried about like character motivations and dialogue and stuff. And then you're like, this happened to me recently with the book that I've got coming out next year, that you just read. I did all this sort of like preliminary like politics stuff I wanted to talk about, and then I basically forgot about it for a while. Mm-hmm. And then I was reading the finished product and I was like, oh no, did I like lose it? Is it gone from the book? And then a friend that I sent it to me, replied to me, was just like, I can't remember exactly which thing it was, but he said like something about the book that was like exactly the point I was trying to make. That's not in the book anymore, really. I was like, oh, cool. It's just kind of like, it is the magic of like my own, you have to trust your own brain to like sort of, if it's just humming in the background it'll end up in the work, and I'm trying to let myself do that more instead of being like. I've never had anyone in a book just make an argument like out loud to the reader, you know.
Yeah.
But I think.
That resonates with me.
Yeah.
So sorry. I listened to one of my recordings I did with somebody else a couple weeks ago, and I say that resonates with me so fucking much. I'm trying to consciously just say
sure. Yeah.
I feel that because you have to like take seriously what's happening in the moment to moment.
Yeah.
And you can't really plan all that stuff. This is my experience of that is probably very different. Most of your work, long format work, has been like for publishers where you're doing the whole thing in a much more planned, regimented way than I have done most of my work.
Yeah.
So I would think that our relationships to that is different because the role of like discovering that or navigating what that looks like throughout the course of a project is probably very different if you're like giving them a whole outline.
It's all very front loaded.
Yeah.
Like I'm in the middle of pitching a new book right now. And like I've already I had to drill down and like send them like a chapter by chapter breakdown of everything that happens in the book already. Mm-hmm. And like obviously
do you like working like that?
I love working like that. It's awesome. I like when I'm drawing, I hate thinking about anything but the drawing. Uh-huh. I like to write the whole book in one go. I like to sit there for a couple of weeks and outline just thinking about that. Like I don't want to have to, and then like I sort of enjoy the ability to just like I have a script that's written down and I am for the next year just the artist on this book, and it almost feels at that point like someone else has written it.
Yeah.
Because by the time I'm inking, I'm like a year away from having finished the writing.
Yeah.
Which to me is amazing because I can the only thing I'm thinking about is the visual flow of the thing. I don't really thumbnail, so like all like the discovery stuff is kind of like me like sitting down at the blank page. I mean, what happens is I end up penciling every page twice. I do like a very like rough penciling, and I've got a vague idea of how many panels I want on the page, but layouts I'm just sort of like when I get there, I want to I read the pages, which is like the first time I'm reading them in a long time generally, and I'm just like okay, well I want to communicate X, Y, and Z thing on the page, and at that point it's really nice to sort of like discover things like a character moment that it wasn't in the script originally or something like so. There's like still discovery to be had.
You're still in it.
It's different than I did the first ever comic I ever did really that was like a comic start to finish was a webcomic I did in like the late 2000s that has gone from the internet and I will not name because it is so miserably bad, but was an important learning experience obviously. Mm-hmm. But that story I kind of had like a vague idea of where I wanted to go, but I sat down and did it very serialized in the way that was like this could go anywhere. I'm going to figure out every week where the story goes, which was cool, but I found very panic-inducing. Mm-hmm. If I didn't have anything, obviously there's a middle ground that I think I've seen from what you've posted about your process.
That is absolutely.
There's like a middle ground where you like do a lot of planning, but then you still allow yourself a lot of time to like see what comes to you in the moment when you're writing. Or
I wouldn't have known how to even point at that middle ground without having done it for years and years.
Yeah, of course.
I didn't know you had done any long format thing before Boys Weekend.
Oh yeah, I mean it was a webcomic I did about. It was like this is gonna sound really crazy because no one's ever attempted it before, but like a superhero parody thing. And it was very funny because that comic ran for like 300 or 400 pages, I think, and I was doing it like 3 times a week.
And you were entirely just making it up each time.
Kind of, I had like a vague idea of like, but it was mostly like it was all done in strips. They were all like double decker like Sunday size strips basically. So they were mostly vehicles for jokes, but there was like a story, and it would get serious occasionally. Just real another just absolute novel idea that no one's ever tried in webcomics before. It's like, yeah.
But not everything has to be novel.
No, but it was very much like Baby's first webcomic.
Yeah, that was the time, late 2000s.
Yeah.
It was Baby's first webcomic all over, you know.
Yeah, and it's very funny because when I got into it, to me, webcomics were like already sort of like an ancient form that I was like, I'm entering a grand tradition because I've been reading webcomics since like 1997 or something.
Yeah.
So to me, I was sort of like, I want to do this. I'm going to make a webcomic. You know, that was my dream.
That's so funny.
It's crazy to think about because like people talk about the art forms like nascency being like 5-10 years ago, and like to me it was like,
well, 20-year-olds talk about it like
well,
that, maybe.
I gotta stop talking to 20-year-olds, I guess. But like
no, but I know what you mean. I have this experience every time I try to build some historical picture for my students who are around, you know, undergrad age. Like, it's all kind of vanished and invisible, and it's locked in our memory, but it's hard to really chart a course backwards through it, you know, and it really was a long time ago, just in the terms of how the internet has changed 15 years ago or whatever.
It's like you know, there's like 7 historical Troys like under each other. When they're trying to excavate like Troy, I think there's 7. And like when they're trying to find like the Troy from the book, from like the Odyssey, from like the Trojan Wars, they have to go through, have to figure out like which Troy it's from because it's like all just like this stacked thing. But like it's cool that our generation's version of that is like Keen Space. It's like there's just no way to get to the bottom of like what was. I guess you can go really far back in the Sinfest archives.
If you really want to.
If you're brave.
If you're nasty.
Sometimes I check up on that guy, see what he's up to.
It's so wild.
It's
funny to see like it's gotten so like polished and like technically developed in a certain way.
Yeah.
As it's become like his politics have become like similarly
so
crystallized in particular.
Like, his politics are like completely curdled, but he's making this like sort of like very beautiful commercial art.
But they both, I mean, it's a self-teaching medium, right?
Yeah,
everybody gets better at drawing in their own kind of clunky autodidact way.
Yeah.
And everybody develops their little politics in their own insane way or whatever.
I always like, there's like a couple of turns it takes where it's like the art gets really good. And then there's always sometimes, I think this happens a lot of the times, like there would be like a break and the artist will be like, I forgot how to have fun with the drawing. And the drawing becomes insane or bad for a while. Which, like, I don't know. I'm looking forward to that phase of my career where I'm like too happy with how I draw and then start to go insane and start drawing stick figures or something.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. We were talking about this the other day, but you were saying that you've been locked in doing these big publisher things. What is the space that you have for exploration like that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I still
this
have...
is a huge commitment of time, these 2 things right after...
Yeah, it's like a year and a half each. And, you know, I've had, like... I finished Simplicity, the book that's out next year. I finished that in June. You know, and it's November now. Mm-hmm. And I spent the summer just sort of, like, trying all sorts of other shit. And then I spent the last 2 months, like, on a book pitch. But, you know, I think... I was really burned out, but like so right now I'm in the middle of like trying to find the fucking, we were talking about this the other day, like trying to find like the joy in like drawing again. And I bought like an actual factual sketchbook and have been trying to like doodle for the first time in probably 3 years. Just because I like lost that part of my practice completely. In terms of like space to experiment, at least I do still have the one thing that grew out of my dumb webcomic that was mostly just a learning experience only, and I shouldn't have put it online. You know, I should have done it and just kept it in my house like a normal person. But then the root of that was like, I started doing on Fridays instead of my regular comic, like a gag strip. And I started doing that in 2009. And I'm still doing that every week. It's still the same strip. So like I do have this space where
I didn't know that was one big uninterrupted thing. That's cool.
Yeah, like I've been doing a weekly comic now for 15 years of just some gag of just like whatever joke I feel like doing that week. I think over 15 years, I've missed maybe 10 weeks. I think.
That's awesome.
Like, I've only ever missed a couple of weeks. And I don't know, there's still a space there for me to play with different drawing styles. If I want to try a different way of writing dialogue, there's like a place for me to. It's very funny for me to read scripts from when I'm like designing characters for things, because I'll see characters that look kind of like the characters I'm working on pop up with my strips, because I'm just like trying to get a handle on this kind of face,
And you're not beholden to any sort of, from what I have read, you're not beholden to any sort of ongoing.
No, there's
concerns about consistency or narrative or anything.
Yeah, there's like two ongoing characters, and they're both sort of like, one is like a sort of impish Loki figure who I call the important pundit, who's just like a guy in a sweater vest with glasses, who's a stand-in for whatever thing I want to talk about, like the media.
Right.
And then there's a character called Skull with an Ass, who's a skull with an ass, for when I don't have anything that week.
I'm familiar with that.
Just a running around guy. But that's like a very but both of them sort of exist in like a nega space where they're not worried about any continuity.
Does it feel like, it seems like reading it to sort of different registers. So, but you're doing this weekly thing consistently throughout the process of doing these long, more focused narrative books.
Yeah.
What is that like? Are you switching voices?
It feels like a break, honestly.
Mm.
I mean, again, this is, I think, the advantage of the way that I work, which is doing everything in big chunks. So, like, when I'm writing, is a nice break for me to sit down and draw one day of the week, because otherwise I'd like, besides from like working on like character designs, aren't like drawing like comics when I'm writing. So it's nice to be like, oh, cool, I can like write I can draw a comic, and it's also something completely different to write.
Yeah.
And then when I'm like working on the book, I consider writing not working, because it's easy and you should get paid less to do it.
I do think that's true.
It's kind of true. I hope some comic writers are listening and they're mad at me.
Well, they get their names real big on the cover.
Yeah. As people that do both, you and I can speak to which one is easier.
Yeah.
It's not like prose writing, which is hard. But but then when I'm drawing the book, I do find it's a little harder to get to it, because I'm just like, well, every moment of every day I should be penciling this graphic novel that has a deadline.
Yeah.
So it's harder then, but it is in those instances a break where on the day I'd say, oh, it was great. I could be like a little lazier drawing the strip than I am drawing the book, because the book is so like prescribed, where all the pages have to look kind of the same, and like you got to stay really consistent across style, and like I'm very focused on making every page the best page I've ever drawn. Like there's all this especially for a big hardcover or something, and like there's all this pressure that I put on myself to like, this has to look really good because I'm getting paid by somebody else to do it. Whereas like when I'm drawing my weekly strip for my Patreon or Instagram or whatever, there's like no pressure for it to look anyway.
Yeah.
So like if I don't think the joke needs a background, it doesn't get a background, which is nice. And then the moment I'm always like, oh, this is easy, I can be a little lazy. But I'll go back and read strips from when I was working on the book, and they don't look worse. They're looser, if anything, which is nice to read, honestly, because like I'm clearly like, people's limbs get a little noodlier,
Loose is good.
Things get a little wackier because I'm just sort of like, there's no pressure at all.
The reason that I left the city was because I felt like in order to break certain cultural patterns that I no longer want to be a part of, that I had to be in a healthy environment, or an environment that had less
For me, the revolution is over.
Conflict.
I'm living my life. I'm living in an alternative culture. and I feel.
You were with the Nib in what capacity for some years?
So I was. I mean, it was like I like rose through the ranks. You know, like the publication launched 2013, and that year I sold a couple of. The Boars bought a couple of comics of mine to reprint on the site, and then started commissioning me to do original work like once a month. It was actually the first place I ever got paid to run a comic. Like I'd been paid for illustrations at that point in my life, but I'd never been like commissioned a comic, which was cool. And I was doing original, like one big strip a month for the Nib.
In addition to the rolling weekly thing?
Yeah. And I had a day job at this time. So when the Nib launched, I was working as an assistant to a glassblower. And the only job I've been fired from for my bad attitude. But I got fired from that job. And the day I got fired, I had an interview with the Nib to be the editorial assistant. And then I got that job. And then I was like, for a couple of years, I was the editorial assistant, which was like I ran the Twitter, wrote the emails in the morning. I did some editing, but not a lot. And then that was when the Nib was under Medium, and then the Medium shut us down, and then we relaunched a year later in 2016 under First Look Media, the big media conglomerate that now I simply don't know what they do. They're owned by Pierre Omidyar, but when we were there, it was us and a publication called Topic and The Intercept.
Right.
All of them are no longer there, and two of them no longer exist.
But the parent company still exists.
It still exists. Topic, which was a publication. Occasionally, I'll see their title card before movies.
Okay.
I don't know.
God.
Or going to see was a Brandon Cronenberg movie, Infinity Pool, and Topic Studios came up right before the movie. It was a jump scare for me personally, because at that point, So that was 2016, and then in 2019, First Look decided that we weren't. They didn't know what to do with us. And they laid us all off. But we took the publication independent, and we ran it independently for another 4 years. But when we got rehired at First Look, I was by then the assistant editor instead of the editorial assistant. So I was basically like, I guess you'd call it third in command. But I did at that point. I was running the social media, and I was writing the morning email, and then also I was doing a lot of editing of like, if it was like a humor strip on the website, not one of like the longer journalism pieces, I was editing it, and then by the time we shut down, I was editing more of the long form journalism stuff too.
Yeah. When did it shut down?
2023, after 10 years. And by then we had gotten 15 issues of the print out.
God, it is really a fucking accomplishment. And it's really a cool thing that should be able to exist.
Yeah,
I
mean, it's the thing that's like the most depressing to me is like what we could have had so many times, because like when we were at Medium, we had something like 2 million readers a month or something, because they would just like juice us to everyone who had the Medium emails. Right. And I remember then us like lobbying management there to be like, hey, can you build in some sort of like subscription? Because if we can get $5 a month from, I don't know, 2% of our readers, we'd be doing great. Yeah. You know? And they were like, they dragged their feet on it. And then they're like, don't worry about making money. And then a couple years later, we're like, okay, you have to make money, and then give us a month and then laid everybody off. And
awesome.
And then at First Look, the whole time we were like, hey, can we do a subscription and a print magazine? And they're like, I don't know, we got to figure out some way to make money on the thing. We're like, we do a subscription and a print magazine? And they're like, you can kickstart one. So we had to kickstart the funds, even though we were owned by Pierre Omidyar, one of the richest people on the planet. And we kickstarted the first 4 issues of the magazine and launched the membership of that. And the membership was doing really well. And when they were about to lay us off, they were like, oh, you need to make more money. And we were maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 months away from probably becoming like sustainable. Like our expenses would have met what we were making, including like our salaries and all the money we were paying out to cartoonists. and that wasn't enough for them because they wanted like hockey stick growth forever.
Yeah. These fucking platforms, man.
Yeah, and they
But then, like, what did it look like to make that transition to owning it on your own? Like, I forget exactly. I remember that happening, but I forget exactly what it looked like when you were trying to establish the Nib as its own independent thing.
It was I mean, it was hard because it was like we all got fired summer 2019, and then got it launching again fall 2019, which if you remember, right after that some stuff happened in the world.
I do.
And so it was just it was hard to get things off the ground. Like during the pandemic, the cost of paper suddenly went crazy.
I remember.
Which was really hard for us.
Yeah.
But
God.
Getting established was like, it was really hard because we had to get everyone to like, I think we were able to keep people that were signed up to the magazine, but we had to, our website was on a proprietary CMS that they had built for us. So we had to migrate everything to some other website. Mm-hmm. We had to hire a bunch of part-time people to like maintain the site. All these like functions that we had at First Look, like marketing people and engineers and whatever, we had to like go figure out how to do that on our own, which was hard. I mean, this was like stuff that drove Matt Bors insane for years. And I think after like 4 years of doing that, we were all just sort of like, we just weren't making enough money anymore. It was hard to, because retaining subscribers is such a hard thing.
Yeah.
And it requires like a full-time person to just be like getting subscribers. We just couldn't afford having a person like that.
Yeah.
At the scale we were operating at, running comics every day and the print mag. So we cut down the number of print magazines a year to 3. And then at one point we were all just sort of like, nobody was full-time at this point. Everybody was part-time. At that point it was like we could either make the publication not publish every day and cut it down to 2 magazines but not cut the price of it. We could like keep diminishing it, or we could just say it's been a nice 10 years. Mm-hmm. What a nice accomplishment, and like leave with it being sort of like still a thing people liked. Mm-hmm.
God, so much of this is just so much of it is just you were at the mercy of these platforms.
Yeah, I mean, it was
the thing. And
First Look was more interested in getting like a topic Apple TV app off the ground because the potential for growth there. Like, it is not enough for a media company to just make the amount of money that it costs. It has to be growing at all times for some reason.
Yeah.
It's just not sustainable, A. And B, like, that's not how you get, like, good art. I don't know. Like, it's just...
Yeah.
What's wrong with just making enough money to make the thing so you can keep making more of the thing? Because what's important to us was the thing.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, this is all escalated really intensely in a lot of different fields lately, obviously,
yes.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
Fields with more money than comics seem particularly fucked.
There's not more fields with more money than comics with them.
Like all these animation studios shutting down video games and everything.
Oh, yeah.
I've been interested in seeing, Aftermath? Are you a video game person?
I'm not like
I'm not
a
really
capital V, capital P video games person, but I'm familiar with Aftermath. And I know some of the people a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not either, but like it's interesting to see them try, because it's like a video game journalism thing. It's composed of some people who worked at some big platforms that basically flattened themselves in the same way that you're talking about.
It's like former Kotaku people.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But something in that ecosystem.
Yeah,
It's interesting because they're very transparent about their whole process of trying to like start something that's worker owned and self-directed and not tied to a big money concern, and trying to like get subscriptions and maintain subscriptions. There's a way in which that has to be the fucking future for a lot of internet media.
Yeah, I mean, like worker-owned media, I think, is the sort of way forward for journalism. I don't know if I think there's a difference between that and like every person like quitting their big media job to start a newsletter because those people need to be edited and they need a support network or whatever.
Yeah.
And those people tend to descend, if not into crankdom, certainly into like a self-important sort of like I am now a content creator kind of thing, which is not good for like the health of journalism.
Yeah.
But like, I have a contract. I do 2 illustrations for a month for the website Defector, which was like not like the first worker-owned media website, but in this new wave of them, kind of the first one, and it was a bunch of people that got laid off from Deadspin.
Right.
All like, but they had the advantage of they all got laid off on the same day in a big high-profile way that people were mad at, they all resigned at the same day because management was so horrible in a way that like everyone was on their side in the public, and it was during lockdown. So they were able to launch with all this fanfare and get all these subscribers right off the bat. So they're in a really good position now, but it's like my favorite place to work for. Like, it functions like any other website, but in a way that's like, oh, this feels good. It's like, it is almost utopian, where it's like, yeah, like I still have to talk to like an art editor, and like it still functions like me freelancing for any other publication doing editorial illustration. But just the whole process is so much more transparent. The people are so much more normal about it. And like there's no like, oh, the advertisers won't like it. There's no like, I don't know, it's just sort of like do the best work you can and we'll run it. Which is just so nice. It's just such a nice environment. And they put out like incredible stuff. Like today I was working on a sketch for a piece. It's like written by like an incarcerated writer. Like it's just sort of like, this is just not the sort of stuff I get to work on normally.
That's so cool. That's not the sort of stuff that gets published in a lot of places.
Yeah, especially a place with a lot of reach.
That feels fucking optimistic to me. That sort of seeing that sort of thing happen. I wonder about like that. I mean, how much momentum is there in that kind of approach on the internet, where all of the ways that people interact with the internet are mediated by big corporate platforms, right? Like I think about comics and like, I don't know, worker ownership or self-publication in comics.
Yeah.
And how do you really do that in a world where people don't go to a website really, and you're dependent on all these platforms that can, you're not working for them in the same way, but they can kick you off in the same way. They can.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think all the time about how every time I've ever done book promotion on it, I have like not a humongous following on Instagram, but like a pretty nice chunk of people, and it's pretty dedicated, and like I do well when I post comics. But if I don't post a comic, it gets, I don't know, no impressions at all. So I'm having to resort to like, when I want to do book promo, I have to write and draw a 4-page comic about the book that looks the same as my other comics, so the algorithm won't like kill it. And it's like, this is so bleak, but also like, I do need these people to buy the book so I can keep making books. Yeah,
I was talking about this with Meredith Graham.
Yeah.
I was talking about this with her the last time about like how the dream to me, the ideal thing always is that you just make work that appeals to people so much that they will seek it out, and even if Instagram doesn't show it to them every single update, they will know that they like it and that they want to check on your thing or whatever. But God, it is.
Oh,
so
I was
bleak.
talking to Meredith about this. I ran into her at the Philly Comics Expo thing, and she was telling me about like the number of Steam wish lists you have to be on to get even like shown to people, like in the algorithm, and it was like some crazy number.
Yeah, that is such a more.
And it was like the most depressing thing I've ever heard in my life. And I was like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah,
and she would just,
It's such a more fucking captured medium than comics.
I know.
Everybody's so beholden to that one platform. It seems like, ugh. What is to be done? What is to be done?
I don't know. Like, again, like I think worker-owned stuff is important. I think, I don't know. There's no way to like get rid of social media now, right? We're in it. We got it. It's not going anywhere.
It's going to be fractured, though. I mean,
I think finding a place that like the people actually like, if you are an artist, find one that like is not doing algorithm stuff, is not feeding your shit into the big AI slop.
Yeah.
Is not killing outside links, which is the other big thing.
That's a big one.
You know, I'm not like, and I would never evangelize for a single social media thing, but just like be careful about where you're putting your stuff. If you're going to put effort into, this is where I got to find an audience. You know, I don't know. I try not to think about it too hard. It's all like, this is all downstream. To me, it's all downstream of the work, right? Like, if you are starting out and you're like thinking about what your Instagram presence is going to be like, you fucked up.
I think that's true, yeah.
And like, which is not, but that's also now not to say if you're making good work, your Instagram will be fine. But it's work first. And then if you are strategizing about how to get it out, once you've got something, look for a place that's not going to get in the way as much. But
yeah,
I don't know.
Or just like
Or be completely agnostic.
use the platforms that get in your way, but just don't invest too much mental energy into them, right? Like Instagram is a real get in your way type of thing. So is Facebook, but there's a lot of people there, so I'll cross post my shit there and not think about it much past that, you know.
Oh, I don't check. I've been posting my weekly comic on Facebook for over a decade now.
Yeah,
and I just don't look at it after I post it.
It does. I mean, there's so many more people there than all the other things, so it makes sense to do that.
That's still true. I
think it is still true. I don't know how the fuck that's
I don't know.
true. It's such a disgusting environment.
It's really gnarly. And like, you go look at like a comic I've posted on Facebook, and the comments on there are just like, I don't know where these people are coming from. I don't know why they're on Facebook reading my comic, but they are.
They're just getting recommended it through some obscure black magic thing.
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg is holding the Palantir up to them. I don't know.
I just downloaded my entire Twitter archive. I still haven't deleted my account. I don't know. Maybe I should do that.
I don't know, I'm still on there.
I don't use it anymore, but I just downloaded the whole thing, and I've been looking through my old tweets from fucking 2009.
Oh, God.
And it's insane. I mean, the scale of the internet was so different, first of all. The scale of, like, my audience and my reach was so different. I feel like at that time, in, like, you know, before 2010, there was, like, a smaller, more sort of... a webcomic scene that you were able to grasp all at once in your head.
Yeah, they all fit into one building in East Hampton, Massachusetts.
And I knew all of them.
Yeah, I was going to say
whatever.
Yeah,
but just the number of people on the internet there were so many fewer people that was all that it took, you know. But it's very different. It's weird and bleak to read now, because it's like I was a child and it all felt very exciting and optimistic, but also like it was kind of a little more open and less captured and more creatively exciting and stuff like that.
Yeah, and like I try to separate it out, be like, was I more creatively excited because I was 20? 4? Or was it more creatively exciting because it was? And I think the answer might be both, but like,
certainly,
I would not tell a person who is young now, like, it's over, you missed it, because what does that do? It doesn't help anybody, right?
I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's taken teaching this class a little while to really arrive at. I don't think that's true, but I do not think that that's true. Because I mean,
they're all in corners of the internet I've never heard of.
Yeah. Right?
They're all like, in 15 years, they're going to be on their podcast, Round Lines, talking about how like the heyday of webtoons was so great, and all the great stuff I was reading, and were we ever so young, you know?
Oh God!
And the cycle goes on.
But I mean, the scale is just the scale is the thing.
Yeah, that's true.
When I try to summarize everything that I'm aware of on the Webtoons platform in my head now, it all seems kind of bland and samey. But there is so fucking much there. There is so many thousands of times more comics being made there than there were when I was, starting out. That, like, of course there's interesting stuff with creative momentum happening there. It's captured now. Yeah, it's the fucking miserable thing.
The thing that I actually do miss about the thing that I am like, it was better when I was younger, like decisively, is about how the ways in which we used to discover art, you know? And maybe I'm wrong and there's a way to do it now, but I don't understand it anymore. But the ways I used to be able to like, it's not like bookstores and record stores don't exist anymore, right? But it was just, I feel like I was discovering things that were new that other people didn't know about sometimes, you know? It wasn't recommended to me by an algorithm or whatever, or even a person. I would just find art in the world in a way. And again, maybe I'm just old now, but it feels like the sort of methods by which new things could be found is like irrevocably different in a way that all does feel, like you said, captured. And like, you know, I feel like, yeah, like something like Webtoon. I was thinking about, I was in Japan earlier this year and I went into like the big discount bookstore in Tokyo, like one of the, I can't remember the name of the chain, but there was like a manga floor, you know? And I went to the manga floor to like find some gifts for people, basically. And it was like, there's just so much. And it's so easy to be like, this is all the same, because a lot of it was the same kind of shit. And it was all arranged by not just genre, but by like trope, you know? Which to me is like minorly crazy making, because I hate the idea of trope as an organizing thing. But I understand that like this is a comics making and reading culture that did not grow up with, I'm not a part of, whatever. It's not for me to judge, but it's like a thing I just don't quite understand. But there's just so much of it. They're just like, how do you tell the difference between this stuff?
Yeah.
Because so much of the art does look the same. They are literally organized by saying the stories are the same. You know, they're saying to you, the reader, the stories are the same.
Yeah, in a finer grained detail than just genre.
Yeah, it's like literally, it's like this is a story about this kind of character and this kind of character doing this kind of thing together.
Oh God.
And it's like, you know, like, and I think so much of like algorithm based recommendation is that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, would you like more of this exact thing?
Yeah.
And not like.
I see that sort of. I'm interested in that like trope oriented categorization thing. I feel like that's a type of readership that I've seen in like internet fandom circles for a while. That
Yes.
I'm sure that we've seen where people like get very like fixated on a certain type of character dynamic or something. I think it feels like a big resonant part of like fan fiction culture, right? Like people are really into a certain dynamic, and their interest in whatever else the art is doing, or it as a statement of any kind by a person making it, is entirely subordinate to just does it scratch this particular itch of like this trope or whatever.
Yeah.
Interesting. I don't know. They sure do really like it. I that type of engagement is kind of alien to me. I mean, in a way, maybe I kind of get it in certain ways. But it's a little alien to me.
Yeah, like certainly, like I said, like, oh, I like dystopian science fiction or whatever, but I'm more interested in like what that can enable us to talk about what the author wants to say.
Yeah.
That I am like, oh, well, it's got to tick these boxes for like what's in there. Like I don't want them. I don't know if it gets samey, if it's got the same kind of characters, the same setting, or I don't know. To me, that's. I try not to get too bogged down into like, yeah, like what I guess tropes, like checking this stuff of checking boxes is what I just don't understand. Yeah. And it makes me feel like a little like, you know, like old lady yells at cloud about it. Cause like maybe it's too, I don't know how you get that genie back in the bottle, but this is more to do with like, and I think honestly, that kind of, I keep wanting to say consummation, but that's not the word. Consuming, that's the word. Wow, that's really great. Like that kind of consumption of art, perhaps, would be you could do it in a more healthy way if people's like, if like reading comprehension was doing better as a concept. Sometimes I read what people say about books, and I wonder if we're doing the same thing when we open up a book and read it.
Yeah, I've had that experience.
I don't know if I'm just like an alien now.
I don't know.
If I've aged out of understanding the world.
No, I mean, the ways that people engage with stuff will change. I think that there's always going to be like rich, high context ways of thinking through this stuff. It's probably going to change how that looks. I always like, whenever I confront that stuff, I just am like desperately relieved to have like some sort of an audience that gets what I'm going for. It's interesting that audience tends to be like around my age and tends to have stayed with me for years and years and years. So like maybe it is a changing thing.
Maybe, and there's not like, it's not like there's nobody out there doing interesting work that gets read in an interesting way. I just do worry that like, and this is not just a problem with fiction, it's like a literal problem that's like documented with like all reading comprehension. It's just like people like, it's not taught in the same way anymore.
Yeah.
And people don't engage with fiction in the same way. And I think, and I think a lot of this also is like, you talk to people in publishing, and there's been a sort of like YA-ification of adult art. And I think as an author, we sort of have a responsibility to just keep making work that is complicated, because it does kind of force you to get better at reading. Mm-hmm. Which is not to say like, oh, I'm so smart and my work is so complicated, because a lot of it's quite stupid. But like, I don't know, I feel like it's working in publishing. It is always like, I feel like I'm always trying to resist simplifying things or making things more pat. Like a thing like one of the most popular living makers of anything right now is David Lynch, right? Who makes the most oblique shit imaginable. And people love it, and they don't. And not everybody sits there trying to solve it. And they just like let it wash over them, and they sort of like let this guy do whatever. And it's like, if people can take that in and not like reject it out like a bad organ, like there's space for. There's got to be like, I mean, and I think we've both been able to find readers and not like.
Yeah, I kind of felt that with Miyazaki's new thing. Are you a Miyazaki person?
Yeah, yeah.
The Boy and the Heron kind of has that quality too, resisting and organized reading.
Like I remember watching that movie and thinking like in the theater the whole time like, okay, I got to figure out like what this means, or whatever, because your brain gets trained to do it.
Yeah, no, and it has an allegorical texture.
And it feels like the movie is very much like, and what do you think this means?
Yeah.
Which like by the time you get to the end, it's like nothing means anything. They're like the world or whatever is like kind of like the metaphor factory. Mm-hmm. Like it's like this is the dream place in which dreams are made. Like it's not like there is no metaphor for what's happening. Like you are in the place by which feelings are sublimated into metaphor. Mm-hmm. Like it's like one step even removed from that. And I remember thinking like in the theater like, oh, I'm not sure like they're really connected with me, whatever. And then I was waiting for the subway to go home, and I started like ugly weeping, like out of nowhere, just talking to my partner about the movie. And I was like, oh, I should watch it again, I guess. And I've watched it like a couple of times since.
I want to watch it again.
It's really, I'm no closer to understanding. There's less one-to-one stuff, but if you cannot allow yourself to even try and get there.
I think I feel that. I love that.
Does it resonate with you?
It resonates with me.
Sorry.
To your point, though, I mean, he obviously, the studio, but Miyazaki as an individual with like a creative voice and a weird creative interest, obviously resonates with pop culture in a way that has real purchase. Both of these people we're talking about, though, are like old guys.
They sure are.
Grandfathered into a certain way of doing things, though, so there's that.
That's true, but I mean, I certainly will see stuff here and there where I'm like, oh man, there is space for me in the world to exist.
Yeah.
And that's always nice. Like by which, like, I'll be watching a movie or reading a book and like just see something that is like truly astonishingly weird and doesn't try to explain it. Right? And like leave something open-ended.
Yeah.
And I'm always just like, oh, that's nice.
One of the great projects of art is to reconcile us with the world.
Working with fictional settings and interfacing with that uptight, systematic nerd mind, which is kind of in parallel to what we were just talking about. This is a thing I run into a lot. Like, people expect a fictional setting to work in a certain way. There's this fascination with lore, right? Lore. Which frustrates me.
I love to. We talk about this, I guess. My other thing I love to do is gesture at lore that I've not figured out.
Is do what?
Is gesture to lore that I've not figured out or care about.
That's the whole trick.
That's the whole trick. It's
what
just
else
be like,
is there to do than that?
Is to be like in Simplicity, there's like the whole society that they're in is based on a book. And you never see anything from the book.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, I don't care. I don't know. It's a book.
Why
would it matter what's in the book? It's not like you're in a video game. You got to read the diary that's inexplicably only 3 pages. Like, it's not.
Video games are the thing, though. Video game is,
every book should be a fetch quest.
A fictional narrative video game thing. It's a work of fiction with all of the irresoluteness and intention that exists in a prose novel or a movie or whatever. But because it's a system and because it's a place you can wander around or whatever, I think it leads people to think that it's a literal space where all the details are there and have to be figured out and objectively exist.
Right.
I think this is
deleterious to the reading experience.
It has contributed to the corruption of the whole thing.
Oh.
Like, it contributes to everybody treating art as just an objective window on some fucking system.
I was going to say, say the word magic system to kill you instantly. Probably, yeah.
Years ago I tried reading Brandon Sanderson. The big...
Oh, yeah. He's like the biggest author on Earth right now.
The
that's
big
not
fantasy guy. Yeah. He's absolutely hegemonic in terms of like what fantasy fiction is now.
Yeah.
And he writes like a fucking video game. And so central to his conception of like world building, which is a thing I think and talk about a lot, but it is kind of a framing that I do detest.
Yeah.
Central to it is like a magic system and the idea that it has to be this thing that works, and if a character does a thing magically, the reader has to understand the cost of it and like how it all works into...
Are you playing Magic the Gathering? Like, Jesus Christ.
Like, where there is a satisfaction and an interest in working with systems in a story, I think, but like...
Yeah.
Whatever. I mean, it's just a...
No, this is important to me now, like, as I'm, like, sort of building out stories in, like, more and more obscure, like, more invented settings. Mm-hmm. Like, Boys Weekend was very, like, oh, it's just Las Vegas, but what if it was in international waters? Like, that's easy. That's something people can wrap their brains around really easily. Mm-hmm. It is mostly a vehicle for background gags,
Yeah.
But, like, Simplicity is, like, the world doesn't quite work. Because I haven't thought about every single thing about it, like, like it's the future in America's collapsed into like warring city states, right? With sort of like gun nuts and billionaire compounds sort of dotting the landscape between them, and also a bunch of the billionaires are living in space, but I barely touch on that. I don't even talk about it, But like I thought about how society would function, but like how they got there, I don't know how they build the walls. Like this is not important to me. What's important is where we start is where we start. Yeah.
Well, and you're doing something like kind of there's this metatextual angle to it, Simplicity.
Yeah.
Where I don't know how you have thought about this, but you were doing a thing about a kind of a post-apocalypse, right?
Yeah.
Where there's all these different explorations of what a post-apocalypse looks like in different places. Mm-hmm. But then also there are instances where you are engaging with other images of what a post-apocalypse is. Am I saying this correctly?
How do you mean?
There's those right-wingers who have their own image of a post-apocalypse. There are these like pop cultural images of what a post-apocalyptic thing is. Yeah. It's all like it all just gets re-articulated based on the particular ideology or whatever. And
Yeah.
it's this huge, rich area of like fictional exploration to bounce off of. It was an interesting thing.
Because so much of the book came out of me thinking about how stuff is entered into the historical text. That's why there's all these interstitials. That's like the museum and all this stuff. Like, it's not just like, oh, who tells you your history, but just like what counts as history, you know, at all to anybody, and like how do we absorb things that we are told about the world we live in and where are they coming from, and what does that do to our psyches? It is again the thing of the dispossessed, where like to abolish private property, they had to invent a new language. The people on the moon in the book, because like our own language is too oriented around work. You know, so I just think about like what does like you are raised with the world being a certain thing, and what does that do to in your head what the possibility for the world, what it could look like, and what even changing it could look like in your mind. And the other thing, like I was also, and this grew out of an obsession I had with like a book that I read called Paradise Now. That's about all these like 19th century millenarian, pre-Marxist socialists, sometimes religious, sometimes cults, but they're all communes on some level. And they were all over New York and Pennsylvania and Ohio and into the Midwest. They called it the burned over country. It was so lit with religious fervor. But this book focused on 5 or 6 of these groups, like the Shakers and like the Oneidas, who are in upstate New York. Thank you. And Fourier was one of these guys that they like made a city based off like his writings. This guy Charles Fourier, who, you know, and like all these people like they have their wacky ideas or whatever. But there was at the time, the world was not in like turmoil, right? But it was like the Industrial Revolution, and people were given over to millenarian thinking, like the old, like the Bible version of saying millenarian, like the millennium is approaching, not the year 2000, but like the biblical millennium, like God is going to descend onto earth in a glistening golden cube called New Jerusalem, and there's going to be 1,000 years of peace, and then the rapture is going to happen. Like that millenarian thinking, because what we thought the world could look like was changing severely. So everyone was kind of like, well, the world's ending, right? And some people were like, that's good. And that means me and my friends can like put our philosophy to use in the world. So I started getting very obsessed with this, and then thinking about the way that interacts with like history that we know. And like, so yeah, in the book Simplicity, there's a lot of like, these people have, like the right wingers in the forest have sort of been like, well, we know the end of the world is coming because, you know, the libs took over or whatever. We're going to go live in buried school buses in the woods. Like a thing that people do now. But like if the world ended, like those people practically couldn't, they depend on all sorts of commercial goods, you know? Like where are those guys getting bullets from? They're not making them. They're not
making them out of acorns.
Making them out of acorns. They're not, they're not smelting. Yeah. I don't know, like it just, but it's funny we talk about like lore and like developing a setting, the dreaded W word, world building. But like, you know, like there's this part where like, you know, those right winger guys, like their project fails because they are not imagining a new world. They are not, they are dependent on the old world. They are actually in power in the old world and don't understand that they are, you know? Yeah. But
they're literally reactionary.
They
only
literally
exist in reaction to, yeah.
That's right. Whereas like the people in like the commune in the book, I kind of did enough to think through how that society could function for 100 years, because they've been there since the 1970s and the book takes place in the 2080s. But like, you could easily, if you're like obsessed with crop rotation technology or whatever, you could go say like, oh, the things that I've laid out in the book wouldn't work. These people would have all starved to death. Where are they getting glasses? You know, that kind of stuff. And like, there are explanations for it, both in the book and in my head, but like, that's not interesting to me to put on the page at all.
No, it's a novel of ideas.
It's a novel of ideas.
You're interested in these things. Just become ways of talking through, you know, systems and political currents now, kind of.
Yeah, I wanted to talk more about like political separatism as a thing, not like how would me and my friends commune work when we start a commune.
And he came all the way from Chicago just to see him. And he came up to him and said, help me, you know, I'm in trouble. I want to change. I want to get out of those old ways.
Conflict. And that in order to become a healthier and whole person, that I had to be
This guy's first reaction was to say, well, you know,
in an environment that was healthy and whole, and so I moved to the country.
who am I? I can't help you.
The end of the world thing is hilarious. I mean, I like just thinking about what it felt like in 2020 when it really seemed like every global infrastructure was just going to collapse within the next few months or whatever. My life was falling apart. Everything was fucking dissolving. But like, it's such a weird fantasy to think that there's a clean break like that. To think that Jerusalem comes down.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, I will say, like, I myself was given over to some thoughts about that, like living in New York at the time. Like, did you leave the city at all?
No.
Yeah, I stayed put. Oh, I live around the corner from a hospital in Queens, which was like the global epicenter of, we're also still in Queens now.
I was Brooklyn then.
You were Brooklyn, yeah. But like, the global epicenter of the pandemic was like 2 neighborhoods over from me.
Yeah, God.
I think in like Woodside or Sunnyside. But like, no, it was Elmhurst, sorry. But like, you know, I heard ambulances all day, every day for months. I was out at a lot of protests. I was like, you know, we could in a car get from my neighborhood in Queens to Times Square in about 10 minutes and park the car in Times Square.
Yeah.
You know? I don't know. It did feel like, in a weird way, it feels like we're at an inflection point, right? Like, the world could go one of a couple of ways, and one of them is good. You know, like, could the world ending be a good thing? You know, like the world. They don't say that the new world is having like a really tremendous time being born. It's struggling, right? Like a birth is not an easy thing.
It's slouching.
It's slouching, man. The gyre, it's widening. You know, I think it felt for a moment like, are we at a point where we could emerge from this without the police? You know?
God damn.
There was like there was a minute there.
Really an inflection point, like
and I was like, you know, I think about sometimes like, is this what the summer in 1969 felt like? When it felt like the world was falling apart and everybody was in the streets, and then the bastards won or whatever, and then we experienced the 70s and 80s, like, and that's what we've got right now. You know, is this what happened in America? Like, obviously, all over the world in the late 1910s, there was a lot of overturning of the old systems, but like it was happening here too. And again, the bastards won, and we experienced the 20s and 30s. You know, like I think at some point they have to stop winning. I don't know. I have to have hope about that. But yeah, it did feel like living through the end of the world for a little bit. That was instructive for my fiction writing, which is so important.
Yeah. No, and I mean, the thing that I've devoted my entire life to for the past 2 years is an end of the world thing. It's a thing orbiting around end of the world questions and like what that means or whatever. Because like years and years ago, I would have thought that an end of the world story is just like a zombie movie where it's all gone and it's all just straggling individuals outside of politics and structure, but we're all just gonna still be in it. And
it's funny. I'm like, it is not. It's extraordinarily different in almost every other regard. But the book pitch I'm working on right now is also about like it is some of it is a post-apocalyptic story. It takes place. This is like, as my work becomes more esoteric and I go a little more insane with every passing book, a book that takes place over the course of 12,000 years.
Awesome.
But we'll see if they buy this one. But like,
that's great.
But in it, it's a part of it is like, like it is the post-apocalypse, scare quotes. And people are sort of like trying to build society anew, right? In a very sort of similar, in a similar way to Third Voice, where it's just sort of like, the world doesn't end. Like the world's always ending somewhere for someone, right? The world's ending right now as we talk in your living room, somewhere for somebody all the time. Like there's parts of the world right now, I think about Gaza a lot, obviously. Like there's parts of the world where like, the apocalypse is happening right now, right? And that's always been true for all of human history. Like I think about the disconnect between like the Bronze Age collapse, right? In what was it, like 1200 BC, and like they had no conception of that in China, in North America. Like people were just sort of bopping along, right? Like if you were like an Olmec, or if you were living like the Tenochtitlan society and like you had no idea about the sea people or whatever, like just so like the world's always ending somewhere. Like the end of the world is not a thing, really. Unless we all die, which could happen. But it's just
well, I mean, we now have new globalized technologies of climate change and what have you. So it's becoming more and more of we're all more and more involved in it.
For sure. And like, with climate change too, like there's going to be the apocalypse is going to hit the Maldives before it hits here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Like by an order of decades, if not like a whole century or more. Like
no, and to your point, it is hitting places all over fucking already.
Yeah, exactly.
in that along that axis.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to say about like the so-called like straight line of progress or whatever. Like we're always sort of zigzagging all over the place. Did you read The Dawn of Everything, David Graeber book?
Oh, I like him.
You should. He wrote it with another David. I can't remember the name of the second author, but it came out right after he died. But it's just I think you would really like it. I think, but it's this big doorstop book about like basically like how was society formed, right? And like was it this straight line that we are told? Like, is it, like we build simple tools and then we build more complicated tools and then we learn how to farm and we specialize and then we create a complicated economy? And society, like, left alone will always look one way with human beings? Or is there like this infinite diversity in both the order in which things could happen, the things that can happen, the way, or like the ways in which society is structured, period?
That feels really parallel to the Debt book, where a lot of it is he talks about like the hegemonic picture is that bartering emerges as basically a proto-currency, and then currency is an inevitable invention. Like it's just a reckoning with the fact that these are just sort of hegemonic pictures. These aren't assessments of what actually materially is possible.
Yeah, and like there's like why can we not think about different ways to organize society?
Yeah.
And this book, The Dawn of Everything, says like not only are there other ways to organize society, but it's been done. And those societies ended for one reason or another, or we don't see them, or we don't care about them, or they got subsumed or conquered or whatever. But like they didn't fail, right? But societies just have a life cycle, Yeah. The one we're living in now isn't that old either. Like, you could probably date like the way we live to like the early 19th century, right? Maybe. I don't know. It just seems like when like capitalism is more formalized, right? I don't know. I just feel like there's just so many, and I just think about this a lot in my work, and I try to think about it more and more, and try to engage with it. These questions of like what does, and I think it's because everyone's always it does feel like the world is ending all the time now. But like, what does that mean? Is thornier than just zombies.
Okay, thank you for listening. The audio sources for this episode are Grassroots, Rural Communes in the USA, a short film from 1975, Landscape of Pleasure Part 1, an episode of the 70s art documentary series, The Shock of the New, I think that's what it is, and the OVA Rio Kunohara Labyrinth, as usual. Alright, I think that's all I have for you. Nice to talk to you. Have a good one. Bye.